Hi everyone, and welcome back to another TFT Masterclass. Today we are going to be talking about 5 easy comps that you can play on PBE Upset 12. Before we get into it, we have a mobile gaming survey where you can win cash prizes just for participating. All you have to do is fill out a simple survey about your mobile usage habits in the Google form in the pinned comments or in the description. And once we hit 200 survey respondents, we'll be giving out 4 $50 USD to 4 respondents. And once we have 400 respondents, we'll be giving out 8 $50 USD to 8 different survey respondents. So definitely give this a fill out if you want some free cash. And yeah, thank you. So getting straight into it, as I mentioned, we have 5 comps today. We have 3 standard and then 2 reroll comps. We're going to talk about Pyro, Frost, Varus, Olaf as our first one. Move on to a melee comp, Warriors, Gwen, Fiora, and then final off, we have our Faerie, Kalista, Rakan. For our reroll comps, we're going to talk about 2 comps, Blaster reroll, and then Sugarcraft, Jinx reroll. So going to be quite a long video today. However, we're going to get through each composition in detail so then you know exactly how to play them on PBE. So getting into the first one, Pyro, Frost, Varus, Olaf. You might have heard this one as like Fire and Ice. So what this is going to be a level 8 standard physical damage burst comp. So standard comps, you're playing on level 8 and you're stabilizing around 4 costs instead of reroll. This comp is best with a Pyro or Frost +1, either from an augment or from a charm. Then let's talk about our traits real quick. So the 2 main traits, Pyro and Frost, hence Fire and Ice. Pyro, what does it do? It essentially provides team-wide attack speed that is infinitely scaling as long as your Pyro units are killing enemy units. And then Frost is providing AD and AP to your Frost units. And then also, as you kill enemies, depending on what your Frost breakpoint is, you'll summon Ice Soldiers after you kill an enemy, and then they will taunt the enemies and also explode if you get to 7 Frost. That's what the 2 traits are, and since we're playing a physical damage comp, we're going to be requiring Sunder in our composition. That's a quick intro into the traits. Moving on to the actual abilities here. So our 2 main carries are going to be Varus from Pyro and then Olaf from Frost. So what does Varus do? Well, Varus is essentially AD range caster, and his ability is a 2-parter. It's AoE and it's a physical damage burst. His 2 traits will give him attack speed and damage amp from Pyro and Blaster, which means that for this unit we're going to be building crits and pure raw ADs, such items such as Infinity Edge and Deathblade. Olaf is going to be our melee bruiser, so he's going to be leaping between targets. He has an attack speed steroid, omnivamp, and CC immunity during his ult. And his traits will give him AD and AP from Frost, and then AD from Hunters. So plenty of AD for this unit, which means we're just going to have to be building around more of a defensive, and then also some extra omnivamp as well. So here's what your level 8 board is going to look like for your Pyro Frost composition. You're going to be 3 iteming your Olaf and your Varus. So Varus, as I mentioned, like your DB and your Infinity Edge +1. And then for Olaf, even though he already has Omnivamp, it's still good to give him some more of a like bruiser defensive items because he has so much attack damage coming from his traits. Our main tank is going to be Nasus, which has both Pyro and Shapeshifter activated, and since he scales off of HP, we'll give him a Warmogs and then some sort of regen, either Redemption or Dragon Claw, and some resistances from a Gargoyle Stoneplate. In terms of positioning, you're going to be wanting to same side your Nasus, Olaf, and Varus, so you get spearhead through one side of the enemy board rather than have your damage splits. And one thing to note, the Varus ability has a very long wind-up time, so this means items such as Ginsu's are not ideal because he will lose time stacking that. As I mentioned, Frost or Pyro +1 is really good. If you have a Frost +1, then you can play Twitch over the Kog'Maw, and then you'll have 5 Frost. And if you have a Pyro +1, then you can just play 5 Pyro, which is an extremely strong trait. On level 9, you're going to drop your Kog'Maw, and you're going to play Twitch plus another Frost, so such as Diana is a very good legendary unit and gives you 5 Frost, and then itemize her with such as Spark or Crown Guard. BIS Augments to go along with this comp, so Frost Crest or Crown, Pyro Crest or Crown, Cauterize, and Frosty Frontline are the new set 12 augments for Pyro and Frost. So Cauterize, it was just essentially a Pyro combo augment, and then Frosty Frontline will give you a dummy with an Eternal Winter. Other augments such as Tiny But Deadly, Combo Caster, Unify Resistance, and Martyr are very good in this comp as well, and will definitely help out your Varus and your Olaf. So super strong comp, definitely start leading into this if you get like a Pyro drop early, or if you have a Frost of Pyro +1, or if you just have general AD items. Moving on, so we have our first melee composition here. So our previous one had a mix of ranged and melee. Now it's just going to be pure melee carries. This is Warrior Gwen Fiora. It's another level 8 composition. However, this is more of a mixed damage comp where we are dealing physical and magic damage. Our first trait here, Warrior, gives us Omnivamp plus damage amp, and this is the damage amp is increased once we are below 40% HP. Our other one that we're going to be playing is actually Preserver, at least for this version of the composition, which provides team-wide max HP healing or mana restoration if our HP is full. Since this is going to be a mixed damage comp, we're going to be needing both Sunder and Shred. That's the intro into the traits. Our main two carries are going to be Fiora and Gwen. So here is how they work. Fiora is essentially an 80 melee bruiser. She has brief damage reduction, and then she'll sweep through groups of enemies, dealing damage to all of the targets equally. This means that if she is attacking a large group of enemies, she'll be dealing a decent amount of damage to each one of them. However, if she's just ulting one enemy, that means she will essentially one-shot it. Her two traits, Witchcraft, will give a lot of enemy debuffs, and then Warrior, as we mentioned earlier, will give her Omnivamp and Damage Amp as well. Our second carry is going to be Gwen. So Gwen is going to be our AP melee bruiser, and she'll dash around enemies, snipping in a cone, as she has done in previous sets. One thing to note is she's going to be dealing more damage every 2 casts, because every second cast from her passive, she will gain a snip stack, and the more snip stacks she has, the more damage she will deal. Her two traits, Sugarcraft gives her AD and AP, and then Warrior will give her Omnivamp and Damage Amp. Here's what your level 8 board is going to look like. So make sure that you're same siding your damage, so your Fiora and your Gwen, so that way your damage is all hitting the same side of the enemy board and you're able to make it to the backline. And if the enemy carry is like an AoE or damage over time, so essentially anything but single target burst, then you could same side as well. So this is like if you're against a Xerath, Karma, or Rise, they'll essentially never be able to kill your drain tanks, and you'll be able to make it to their backline after killing their frontline. In terms of Sunder, you're either going to be wanting to put a Last Whisper on Fiora or an Even Shroud on the Rakan, and then you put Rakan closer to the Fiora. And in terms of Shred, either put a Spark on the Gwen or a Shiv on the Bard. Once you hit Morgana, then make sure you take out Zoe and then play Morgana for 4 Preserver, and it's better than your 2 Scholar for your Bard. On level 9, you'll most likely be hitting a Morgana, so as I mentioned, take out the Zoe for the Morgana, and then you can also play a Nora and give that Yuumi over to your Fiora too. Remember, Yuumi will provide you extra healing every now and then, and also stacking adaptive, so stacking attack damage since Fiora is a physical damage unit. And then that is how you cap out your board. Best in slot Warrior Augments, so Warrior Crest +1 will essentially allow you to drop Nyla, which is not doing anything except providing a trait in this composition. Preserver Crest or Crown will allow you to hit a higher breakpoint of Preserver, which is very good. And then Tiny but Deadly is our last very good one, being able to get more attack speed onto our main carries and also reduce the downtime by them being able to move quickly to the next target. So that is how you play the Fiora Gwen comp. Definitely lean into this if you have more of a melee start. So although Nyla doesn't do anything late game, definitely if you have her dropped early game with like a Bloodthirst or a Titans, you could definitely lean into Warriors. Moving on to our third and final standard comp is going to be Faerie Kalista Rakan. So this is where we are going to be playing Vertical Faerie, and this is a level 8 comp as well, mainly doing physical damage, and this is a stall comp. What the actual trait does is provide flat HP depending on your trait breakpoint, and also once you get to 6 Faerie, you'll be granted a defensive item known as your Queen's Guard armor, and then at 2 and 4, or even when just putting 2 Faerie in, you will get your offensive Faerie item, which is going to be the Queen's Crown. Now the way these work is they are only able to be put on Faerie units, and if you bench the Faerie unit, then the item comes off and you're able to really shift around the item depending on who you have items on. Faerie Crown gives you 30 AD and AP, and then after dealing damage 12 instances, you'll gain 25 or 30 or 40 damage amp, or even 75 if you have 9, depending on your breakpoints. So this is going to be going on her Kalista, which means you only want to be building 2 offensive Kalista items since the crown is going to be her third. The Queen's Guard armor is going to go on a Rakan and gives 30 resistances, so armor and magic resist, and also 100 HP. And what this item does, it grants you 30% increased healing and shielding, which Rakan heals and shields from his ability, so this is great. And this unit will also heal for 12% of the Queen's damage dealt. So that's why these work really well together. Basically, the more damage that the crown holder does, the more the armor will shield the holder, and then the armor holder is tanking for the queen. So it just works really well together, kind of like a king and queen moment. So here are 2 units, Kalista and Rakan. We're going to talk about their abilities and how they work. So Kalista is going to be an AD ranged carry. She has sustained damage, where she continuously stacks spears into her targets and nearby enemies. So since this is going to be like a stacking spears and sustained damage, we're definitely going to be wanting to put a Rage Blade on her. And her 2 traits, Faerie, will give her flat HP and that Queen's Crown. And then Multi-Striker is her second one. We're going to be playing 3 Multi-Striker, giving her a 33% chance. Actually, I think they nerfed it to 30% on day 2 PBE, to attack 2 extra times. Rakan is going to be our melee tank, and as I mentioned, he grants himself a shield. He will also deal a little bit of damage and then grant another shield to nearby allies. His 2 traits, Faerie, is going to give him HP and that Queen's Armor, and then Preserver will give team-wide HP or mana regen. So this is what your level 8 board is going to look like. You have 6 Faerie and 3 Multi-Striker as your main traits. Make sure that you're same siding the Rakan and Kalista, and that the Kalista is hitting a priority target. Remember, the way Kalista works is she's going to continuously embed spears into her target until essentially the target dies. So this is, you're going to be wanting to attack either like a Spark holder or like an Evashround holder, or even just like target the enemy melee carry first, because eventually, as long as you have a 3-item Kalista and a decent setup, that unit will die. Play Seraphine until you have Milio. Once you hit Milio, then definitely replace it. It's just a much better unit. And if you actually look around the unit cost of this board, we only have 2 4 costs. Normally this is going to be a Seraphine, so 1 cost as well. So we're having a really cheap board on level 8, which means that you're trying to get to level 9 as soon as possible and roll as little as you can just to stabilize on the Kalista Rakan on level 8. This slide will show you why you want to get to level 9 ASAP. So we're going to drop a couple units here. We're going to end up playing the Camille and Jax over the Multi-Strikers, because this way you have Chrono. The reason why we can't really do this on level 8 is Camille is just hard to find on level 8. So once you find her on level 9, then you can play the Camille and Jax for just a stronger board. And then this is it on level 9. Best Augments, Faerie +1 will allow you to drop Tristana. Kind of similar to the Nyla situation. This is just a pure trait bot, and this unit doesn't do anything late game. And then Royal Guard is going to be the Faerie specific augment, where Fairies will have health regen and damage stacking of the Queen. Other great augments, Tiny but Deadly, Combat Bandages 1-2, Combat Caster, you have my bow, because we need a lot of bows for our Kalista, and also more attack speed the better. Unify Resistance, and any tempo augment like Epic Plus, Slam, and Slam Plus that will help us to get to level 9. And very last one, Pumping Up is actually quite good in this composition as well. So definitely give this a try if you have a bow drop, or if you have like Faerie drops, or you have one of these augments that will cater you or tailor your board into this specific composition. Alright, so those were our 3 standard comps. Moving more towards reroll comps now, is the first one going to be Blast Reroll. So this is going to be a level 7 3-cost mixed damage burst comp, where we're going to be carrying Ezreal and Hwei, Hwei being our main carry, at least for now. The way Blaster work is provides overall damage amplification. However, during the actual ability cast, you'll be granted more damage amp. Since this is a mixed damage comp, we're going to be needing both Shred and Sunder for our carries. So Hwei and Ezreal, both 3 costs, which is why we're going to be on level 7. The way Hwei works is an AP ranged carry. He has burst damage, and he casts extra bolt every 3rd cast. Since he has a mana pool of 40, this is quite easy to get to his 3rd cast. So we're just going to be building like a blue buff and a Nashers, or even a Shojin and Nashers. His traits, Frost gives AP and 80, and then Blaster will give him damage amp. Ezreal is kind of the opposite, so he is now a AD ranged carry. He does AoE damage in a line, and he also blinks within 3 hexes during his cast. Now, one thing to note is for each enemy hit by his blast in a line, it will deal less damage. So it'll mostly deal a large burst of damage to the initial unit that Ezreal hits. His 2 traits, Portal, well, the trait itself gives HP shield to Portal units and random bonuses. However, it's not activated in this trait or in this composition. And then Blaster as well gives him damage amp. So taking these into consideration affects the itemization. Normally on units that don't have any built-in damage amp, you'll be wanting to build a Rabadon's. However, since Hwei has damage amp from both Blue Buff and Blaster, Jewel Gauntlet is going to be better here, or even an Archangel. And then for Ezreal, so if you remember set 10 Ezreal, like Heartseal Ezreal, the way those types of abilities work in TFT, since it is not a consistent damage, Last Whisper is not as ideal. For example, in our previous set, Kalista, her ult kept pumping consistent damage into the units she's attacking, so constantly applying Last Whisper. However, Ezreal, this type of unit is more of a one-time damage, so the way Last Whisper works is the Last Whisper Armor Shred or Armor Sunder effect occurs after the initial ability of the one-time ability occurs. So this means that items such as Even Shroud are a lot better in this case, because that way the enemies are already sundered before the ability damage goes through. So this is how it works for Last Whisper versus Even Shroud and this type of ability. The way we're going to play this is on level 7, we're going to level to, on 4-1, we're going to level to 7 and start slow rolling for our Hwei 3 and our Swain 3, and then Ezreal 3 as well. We're definitely going to prioritize our Hwei items over Ezreal, at least for now. Perhaps this will change before live. And then on level 8, what we're going to do is we have a few droppable units. So Warwick is going to come out. We're going to level to 8, play Shyvana and Briar, and then Rumble is going to come out for Smolder. So you'll see what this board looks like on the next slide. So here it is, looks a lot better, 4 Blaster, 4 Shapeshifter, and remember our main 3 tank items are going to be on our Swain 3, with Nasus holding our secondary tank items. Best slot augments to go with this, Learning to Spell, very good for Hwei, Swain, and also other units, just general AP. Eternal Growth for our Shapeshifters to continuously getting more max HP, and then Prismatic Ticket or the new Prismatic Augment invested to help us hit our 3 stars. And on to our last composition of today is going to be Sugarcraft Jinx Reroll. This is another level 7 3 cost damage composition where you're dealing both physical and magic damage, and I meant to say this is a stall comp. So the way this trait works is essentially set 10's 8-bit. So if you remember playing around Riven or Caitlyn, it's a stacking per round trait, and instead of how much damage you dealt on that round, it's based off of how many components your team is holding multiplied by the trait breakpoints. So for example, if you're holding 2 components and then you have the 2 trait point breakpoints activated, then it will just be a sugar cake of 4. The way the other trait works, Hunter provides attack damage for all hunters, and then after their first takedown, they will gain extra attack damage. So we're going to be running mainly Sunder, but Shred as well for our Gwen. So our main one, just going to talk about Jinx, since we already talked about Gwen. The way she works, she is a AD ranged carry with sustained damage, and her ability is she will gain increased attack speed plus true damage that refreshes on takedown. So from this initial ability, and now that we know how Hunter works, we're definitely going to be wanting Jinx to get her first kill in a combat as soon as possible. So we can get that by positioning her correctly, and I'll show that on the next slide. Her 2 traits are Sugarcraft, which grant her attack damage and ability power, and then Hunter, which grants her also more attack damage. So now that we know that her 2 traits grant her an insane amount of attack damage, that just means we want to be building attack speed on her, Armor Shred or Armor Sunder, and then also damage amps, since she does not have any damage amp on her. Similar to the previous composition, we're going to level to 7 on 4-1 and start slow rolling for our Jinx 3 and then Rumble 3 if we can as well. The one problem with this composition is the front line is a little bit sus, so maybe there will be, if you have more tank items, then definitely better on the Rumble, because this is a stall comp, and the longer that Jinx is able to ramp up, the more damage she will do. In terms of item prioritization, make sure you prioritize your Jinx first, and I explained why these 3 are good. Her actual ability is influencing just her auto attacks, so it's not an actual like ability cast, which is why Infinity Edge is not good on her. And then for Rumble, just tank items, and then Gwen, some sort of blue buff, Spark, and then some healing. Either Bloodthirster is best, but Hand of Justice or Gunblade work as well. In terms of positioning, as mentioned, you want Jinx to kill a weak enemy target as soon as possible in the fight for her passive and Hunter AD, so make sure that you are targeting, remember this is a takedown, so even having Gwen on the same side, so we're able to do more damage, taking down just like a trait bot of the enemy team. So for example, if this was inverse, they would just kill like the Warwick instead of the Rumble with tank items to get her passive and Hunter AD passive going ASAP. On level 8, look to add more frontline. Morgana is super good in here, gives us a preserver and also just a very good frontline unit, which we will look to add on level 8. So this is what our final board will look like, and then we can even go level 9 for another legendary like Emilio. But best +1s, so Sugarcraft, Crest, or Crown, we'll then be able to play 6 Sugarcraft, and we'll have to play a dead Soraka, but that's okay. Prismatic Ticket or Invested to hit our 3 stars, and then essentially anything attack speed related, Tiny but Deadly, you have my bow pumping up. Trade Sector to help us at our 3 stars, Combat Bandage is a new combat augment that allows us to heal, and then Combat Caster and Unifier Resistance are just solid combat augments as well. And that's it. So I will quickly go over a recap of all of our compositions today. Today we talked about 5 that are very easy to play on the current PBE. And the reason why we're doing easy comps or easy meta comps is to essentially not have you worry so much about how to play or looking for what composition to play, and instead being able to focus more on learning what the units do, what their abilities are, learning more about augments, charms as well. So on top, there's already so much information that you're having to take in, and having to also be like looking on the side and being like, oh, like trying to figure out your team. That is just a lot going on. That's why knowing what comps to play going into PBE is super important. Talked about 3 standard and then 3 reroll. So Pyro, Frost, Varus, Olaf. So Fire and Ice, where Olaf is pumping out damage from the front and Varus is out from the back. Warriors is our melee composition, Gwen doing magic damage and Fiora doing physical damage. And then our last one, Vertical 6 Faerie with Kalista and Rakan both helping each other out. In terms of reroll comps, we have 2. So Blaster reroll with our Hwei 3 and Swain 3 and our Ezreal 3 as well. And then our last one, Jinx reroll, we have our Jinx 3 and she is trying to kill an enemy unit ASAP in the fight. So that has been everything for today. Make sure that you join the Training Grounds Discord channel, and I will see you all next time. Thank you and take care.